The other thing that I feel like why a war is inevitable is that I think people around the world want war. I'm just seeing the momentum. The problem is war becomes exciting. People want to see Israel get punished. People want to see the U.S. get taught a lesson. People can see the injustice. We've been seeing the Gaza backdrop for so many years. It doesn't seem like negotiations are possible. So I think people want to see what happens. You get this kind of football game kind of mentality that starts to build up amongst the population on both sides. Because I watched some videos of people that are pro-U.S. military, and they're just like, yeah, we support our troops, we're backing them, we got this. There's this kind of hoorah groundswell starting to build up, and I see it on the other side, and it's just kind of our human reptilian brains start to take over, and we're just like, yeah, let's see this, let's do it. And I have to admit that I've fallen vulnerable to that multiple times. But then when I saw that Axios report come out on Wednesday night, where they said just it's either this or nothing, and Iran said, okay, then nothing. And then I just remember at night before we go to bed, I got scared. I was like, oh man, I know I was kind of like excited about this to some extent. Then all of a sudden I was like, oh damn, this could be real. I'm like, oh fudge, this might happen. And if this happens,
Yeah.
I'm a ton of American men and women on these boats, one gets sunk. What if an aircraft carrier gets sunk? What if and then I just quickly saw how quickly this could go nuclear. So quickly, Israel starts getting hit hard. Yeah. We start losing men, and Israel has their backs up against the wall, and we know about the Samson option. I was like, oh, this, and then it spreads out into a regional war, potentially to a world war. And I'm just like, Jesus, this is terrifying. And 4 hours ago, I was kind of just like, Iran, push back hard against the United States. Tell them, Israel can't have a nuclear weapons program, which I think they still should do. But it just, I was just more cavalier 4 hours ago. And then I heard that Iran said was quite cavalier, said, fine, no. And I was like,
they weren't cavalier.
But not cavalier.
I think
they held to their position. They said they're not going to accept this insane, but then I was just realized like, oh man, I noticed my whole mood changed at that moment. I was like, oof, okay, this is real. Even though it's something that we've been talking about, I've been expecting, and perhaps a bit almost in a bad way hoping,
Yeah, right. No, I understand. I think when I was younger, I often had your attitude towards things, but now I don't want this to happen for the sake of the Iranians, above all, and the Iranians, the government. When you look at, I know people have gotten frustrated with them because they have been so reasonable and they have made concessions and they've shown so much restraint. And perhaps in some cases they showed excessive restraint. I think that can be argued, but war is so terrible, a real war. You understand. You just try to avoid it. But now they feel like they really can't, and they have shown all this restraint, and they have, and it has not. It hasn't mollified the aggressors. The aggressors are now right again at their doorstep and ready to attack again. This is only 7 or 8 months after the last war. And so, and they've seen these internal operations, the attempted insurrection. And so they really have their backs up against the wall, and they understand this is existential. They don't want a war, but they've gotten to the point where they have to, these people clearly do want war and are going to get them one way or another. And so they're just going to have to fight it. If not now, it's going to be soon.
It's just so insane that the United States will do this, that this could be the end, the last chapter of the United States as we know it, at least. And it's because of an insane war of choice that was not in our interest at all, that we chose to do this, that we had every opportunity. We could have just kept the JCPOA to begin with. We could have held our side of the bargain, but instead we're at this precipice where we're looking at a massive war that will turn into a regional war, potentially a world war. And I think the potential use of a nuclear weapon will be incredibly high. And it's for no reason whatsoever. That's what's so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, it's just like it's not clear why why Trump has got that fleet there. I mean, he's been changing his tune. It's because of the protesters. It's because of the nuclear program that you've supposedly obliterated. What's going on? Why are you even there?
Right.
Well, yeah, it's crazy. But you can say the same thing to a great extent about the Ukraine war too. That was avoidable. But it was a war of choice, really, for the U.S. I think it can be argued. They salivated at the chance of a proxy war against Russia, and they thought that was going to mortally wound Russia, and they went for it. And now, with these horrific consequences for Ukraine above all, but then also for Europe and for the standing of the U.S. in the world.
Yeah, but that was a proxy war. People we're more willing to sacrifice other countries' lives. We don't care. We're talking about a direct war where we have a huge high concentration of bases throughout the Middle East. Our troops. It's like this is going to, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm just like, maybe this is what has to happen, because this will finally end this insane empire of the United States with 800 bases all over the world, over $1 trillion military budget. And just this also frustrating belief that the United States military is invincible, when it's just like, guys, we don't manufacture anything in this country anymore. We can't fight any war of attrition. We can't supply, air defense interceptors to Ukraine. How do we expect to be able to engage in a long missile war with Iran? There's just it's just so much of the United States, I think, support for its empire is just based on faith. There isn't anything real underneath it. And I think we need to that faith has to be tested, because that faith of invincibility is going to continue to lead to these type of outcomes, this type of continual imperialism.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But then it's also true that if, for example, a ship is sunk, the reaction, instead of being, oh, okay, really, we overestimated our own powers, this was a mistake, let's go home, but rather they're going to double down, because now U.S. credibility is on the line. And, this may make it appear that we're vulnerable, and we can't have that. So we need to strike twice as hard, 3 times as hard. In the short run, unfortunately, I think the reaction is going to be even, more militarism, and an even more aggressive foreign policy. That's the real danger here,
Yeah.
Maybe finally when the dust settles, then you'll have some cooler heads prevail back home, and there will be a reassessment. But in the short run, emotions will run high, and there's going to be this obsession with maintaining so-called credibility.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking about that as well. Like, if a ship gets sunk or a base gets hit and scores of American soldiers get killed, how do the American people process this? How do they react? Will they say, we have to, how dare they kill our boys out there? We have to back our troops. It's our job as American citizens to support our troops, to back our team no matter what. Or will they be think a little bit more critically and be like, why did this happen? Why did we do this? Why did our boys get killed? Why were they out there on that ship? What was this? How was this protecting America? They joined the Army or the Navy to protect the United States, to make the United States safe and strong and prosperous. This doesn't make any sense. Why did we do this? Will they draw that connection to Israel? I sure hope so, because it's so freaking obvious. I just hope they can see it.
Yeah.
But
unfortunately, I think in the short run they will not, and there will be an emotional reaction and rallying around the flag and the U.S. military in support of further strikes in Iran. I'm afraid that's what's going to happen. And I think the Iranians themselves are aware of that, so they're going to be calculating things. I don't know what they're going to do. Yeah, they need to strike in some way. There's a chance maybe they'll focus more on an economic war. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, maybe hitting gas and oil infrastructure. Within the Persian Gulf, that kind of thing. On the other hand, they may be reluctant to do that because that won't have the same kind of emotional reaction, but it will cause real pain to the U.S.
Well, it hurts the whole world, right? That's the other problem with doing that, right? Doesn't that potentially vilify Iran in the eyes of the rest of the world?
Yes and no. I mean, there's going to be. I think again, it'll probably hurt Europe more than any part of the world. It'll help Russia, but it does harm it. But I think much of the world will understand. I don't know. That's a difficult question. And also the problem is that by doing so, they would risk antagonizing those Persian Gulf states that have become less hostile to them over the last several years. And those states really, because they know that this could happen, they may be, whatever they do, they need to do something, but whatever they do is very risky. I mean, that's the problem with this whole situation. It just does, it's hard to look at some kind of, a good ending to this. It really is hard to see. I just hope, against hope that something works out, but it just doesn't look very good. No matter what scenario you imagine, it just seems like it starts going off into very, very dangerous waters.
If this breaks off into a larger regional war, do you see any of these Gulf states siding with the United States? Because part of me just thinks that like, oh, well, it's clearly the region versus the U.S. and Israel. But then we also know how compromised and bought off a lot of these Gulf states are and how complicit they are in some of these things. So, but you've always said that their populations have never been in support. Like you can't, they're not going to go to war against Iran. Which side will the people go,
Yeah. Well, I think, not too long ago, and even last year and certainly several years ago, you would have these Gulf monarchies secretly rooting for Israel and the U.S. secretly, while making, official statements condemning them. But I think that has changed. And part of the problem is the problem really is Israel and its very reckless expansionist behavior, where before they thought, okay, well, Israel's not a threat to us and they got a lot of money and they're connected to the U.S., which has much more money, and we want to do business with them. So let's, we'll try to keep things, relations with them, on a friendly basis. But now things have changed. They see this very expansive Israel that's now out to destroy Iran, after just overthrowing Assad. And we've seen what they've done in the Palestinian territories in Lebanon. Israel looks a lot scarier to them. And if they're starting to understand that Iran is the only real counterweight to Israel in the region, the only real rival. And if Iran is gone, then they may be next. That's, I think, something that they fear. That's what I think that's what's happening. Even people like Erdogan, who's been playing this double game, they actually don't want to see Israel win this. They really don't want this war to happen. And if they do, I think they'll be greatly alarmed. So they may, if this goes on for a while, you may find, in contrast to in the past, I think during the last war, like there were flights over Turkey and whatever. That may change. Turkey is a member of NATO, but they may say, no, we're not helping this. Or maybe they'll shift and start really providing support to Iran, and the Gulf monarchies will as well.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then this just further shows how suicidal this is, right? Like this will be if that's the case, then this is going to be the end of Israel and the U.S. presence within the Middle East, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think in the end, whatever happens, it's going to greatly destabilize the region. And it will harm Israel, I think, clearly in the long run. Even if a great deal of damage is done to Iran, which is really quite likely, I think, if they have a significant war. Iran understands it's going to sustain a lot of damage. But if they can really hold their own, they can hold together, they can inflict some real damage on the U.S. and Israel. It's when it's over, first of all, you're going to have people, even if they're cheering the troops on during the fight, afterwards, there's going to be some reckoning. Like, what the heck were you doing over there? We lost a ship. We did, whatever. Well, what was that all about? Because, again, the Trump really has not done or his administration has not done a very good job. They haven't done any work to provide a rationale for this.
Yeah, we still don't know
And
what it is.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's crazy. In the past, you can say, this had to be done for these reasons. And, up in the months and maybe the whole years leading up to the war, we were being told again and again, this has to be done, this has to be done. And a lot of people buy it. This time, what is it? So even if they do, inflict a lot of damage on Iran, they themselves will suffer damage. And people will ask, the people in Iran, I think, will by and large understand, well, this was not a war of our choosing. We were attacked and we stand by our government. And we understand why they had to fight back. But in places like the U.S., they say, even if many fewer Americans are killed, they're going to say, why were any of them killed? Why were we there? That I would hope, I think, is what would happen.
What would happen if an aircraft carrier got sunk? What do you think the U.S. would do? Would we go nuclear?
Well, yeah, that's what Scott Ritter, suggested. But that's Scott Ritter, but it's not impossible. I mean, again, it's just like the U.S., like I was saying, credibility is on the line. And that's something that, for the U.S. and, the establishment, the military establishment, this is the existential for them. They have to have this aura of invincibility. Now, it has been damaged in Ukraine, but it's still holding together. But this would be, something that they just would not be able to countenance. And they would have to hit back hard. And then the question is, do they really have, the missiles, the conventional missiles to do it? Perhaps if let's just say that an aircraft carrier gets sunk, perhaps at that point they've already fired all of their Tomahawks, and they would have to go back to Diego Garcia and reload. And maybe they don't, I think they do have quite a few Tomahawks, so maybe they can bring them back. But as we pointed out, Iran's a very big country. And we've seen what's happened in Ukraine, which has been just pummeled by just constant, the attacks by missiles and drones on a scale that the U.S. is not capable of. The U.S. is not capable of really mounting those kind of sustained attacks, missile attacks on Iran. So they go back, they get more Tomahawks, launch them, and then Iran still is able to take out a base or something. So at some point, there will be, I'm afraid to say, people starting to murmur behind the scenes about the need for a tactical nuclear device. There is that risk.
But a tactical nuclear device, if you use it, it's not going to end the war. It's just going to make the U.S. a complete pariah, right? Just a monster in the eyes of the world.
I'm afraid that I think that's true. I think that the world will regard that with revulsion. All but the most slavish, vassals of the U.S. There will be a few countries in Western Europe, and there will be Israel, but I think the rest of the world will be revolted and just, it could, I think it could. That really, more than anything else, could mean the end of the U.S. empire. It would just, as we pointed out many times, their soft power is already greatly diminished. That would be the end. It's just like, you not only are you behaving like a bully, an imperialist, but you are using these horrible weapons and wiping out entire cities. You are a monster. You are the very incarnation of evil. That's the way people would look at it, I would think, around the world. And I think there's, countries that have been reluctant, have tried to maintain this relationship with the U.S. They just say, enough. We would find actually countries just saying, all right, we're cutting off trade relations. We're imposing economic sanctions on the U.S. And the U.S. actually would be hurt. We could survive, but we would be hurt greatly because we rely so much on imports. We'd become very, very lazy. There would be a real panic within
You
the
say
U.S.
we can
What
survive.
would happen?
I don't think we could survive as
Maybe,
a country. It would fall apart, right? I mean, like if China stopped to, put these severe
yeah,
sanctions, like we said, we don't make anything in this country. We rely completely
right.
on imports. Our
Yeah,
export is the U.S. dollar, and China is getting
yeah,
ready to make that move already. There's an
yeah,
announcement, Xi Jinping talking about we need to become the world reserve currency. Essentially, that we need to move up now. Like it's time to step up. I don't know if he said that exactly, but more or less that's what I
yeah. I
understand,
think I
right?
know. I saw the statement. It was very suggestive of that. Right.
Right.
Yeah. No,
No.
it's so this is a process that's happening anyway, but it would, if the U.S. should do something that horrible, that, and I certainly hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it will, but there is a risk when you go down this road.
Yeah, that's the
War has
thing.
its own logic. It's that you're thinking, oh, we never do that, but then have you really thought out what are you going to do if your ships are sunk? What is it? How are you going to deal with the pressures? How are you going to respond? We assume that they think it all out, but often it's clear that they haven't.
Right. Yeah, that's the problem. It's just because I run through this scenario, and that's why when I said when Iran told them, okay, then nothing. Then I was like, oh damn, here we go to war. And then I just quickly just realized like, what does this mean exactly? It mean if U.S. bases are getting destroyed, ships get sunk, we know the U.S. doesn't have the means to win this. And Iran has stated specifically that Israel will not be spared in this either. Israel's hoping to just say, well, we have nothing to do with this, just between the U.S. and
Yeah.
Iran. And Iran is like, no, we know. We
Right.
know who's behind this, why this is all happening. Tel Aviv's getting hit hard. The nuclear blackmail. We know that Israel has nuclear weapons. I mean, this is where it's going to go. It almost seems like there's no other option. You say, I hope it doesn't come to that. I try to find a way where it doesn't come to that. That's the problem.
Yeah. Well, again, there's always something that that you can't foresee. I mean, that's just the nature of living on this planet. I mean, there are things well, I do, again, when I play out these different scenarios in my mind, it just doesn't look good, but who knows, there just may be something that's some ending to this that is less than catastrophic, but it's hard to see.